Hello everyone, honorable colleagues. My name is Ronni Haga from the Faculty of Economics and Business, Raya University. Today I will present our 2026 study entitled The Global Polycrisis and SDG Dynamics, Unveiling the Nonlinear Nexus of Financial Fragility and Geopolitical Instability in Emerging Economies. Together with my research team, we examine how overlapping global shocks are reshaping the trajectory of the 2030 agenda, particularly in emerging economies. We are no longer dealing with isolated crises. Lawrence et al. 2024 described today's reality is a crisis, a condition where multiple global shocks are deeply interconnected and mutually reinforcing. In this era, SDG progress has increasingly slowed and, in many cases, stalled since the early 2020, reflecting a broader structural declaration in global development. The polarity crisis works through a contagion mechanism. A conflict in one region does not remain local. It transmits across borders through commodity price, inflationary pressure, and tightening financial conditions. This dynamic from feedback loops where environmental stress and worsen fiscal instability. And financial instability can further weaken a country's capacity to invest in sustainability, creating a cycle that becomes harder to reverse over time. Structural barriers to progress. Two structural barriers are especially central financial fragility and geopolitical uncertainty. World Bank evidence showed developing countries facing historically high and increasingly rich debt burdens. World Bank 2024. Meanwhile, heightened geopolitical tension reallocate fiscal priorities towards security and defense. Interest risk perception and intensify capital capital outflows. Pattern constant with the global geopolitical risk framework documented by Caldera and Lacoviello 2022. Okay, here theory 1, institutional inertia. Our first theoretical pillar, institutional inertia, building on North 1990 in paid dividends. We argue that development outcomes are cumulative and sticky SDG. Performance, performance today is partly inherited from prior institutionality capacity. This means progress requires persistent structural momentum. It cannot be corrected by instantly, even with short-term policy efforts. Theory 2, to deep overhang trap. She can withdraw on the concept of debt overhang. Krugman 1988 argues that once debt reaches sufficiently high levels, expectation of future repayment reduce incentive to invest today. Moderate debt can help finance development, but excessive debt produces fiscal virtues, crowding outspending on health, education, and essential infrastructure. Theory 3. Third, we conceptualize a geopolitical risks in an uncertainty shock that goes beyond open warfare. Rising GPR receives expectation, increases rights premiums, and rises borrowing costs. It also pushes inventory toward safe haven assets, reducing financing for SDGs related investment, especially when countries need it most. Policy distraction. One of the most subtle but powerful effects of geopolitical risk is policy distraction. When tension rise, governments are pressured to prioritize immediately security concerns over long-term development commitments. This has become a major friction point for sustaining progress toward the 2030 agenda. Here, methodology and data framework. To test this relationship, we use robust econometric approach. Our example covers 30 emerging economics over 2015 to 2024. We combine the SDGs index government debt indicators and the GPR index with a dynamic panel framework estimate using system GMM, allowing us to control for endogeneity and capture institutional memory through lagged deployment outcomes. The economic the econometric model. The model includes a quadratic specification for government debt to test our potential. In fact, that you shape relationship with SDG performance in the structure. The linear term capture the initial development efforts of debt, while the squared term capture the expected result. Effects with debt become a drag. The lack of vision represent deployment inertia, showing resistance in SDG performing over time. Okay, here inverted U-shaped nexus. Our results support to PES resources relationship in PES A deliver. That is associated with stronger SDG projects, consistent with financing needs for infrastructure and social investment. However, in PES B, the burden once a turning point is research additional debt is linked to weaker SDG for performance because debt service costs of deployment spending and reduce fiscal space. The critical fiscal threshold. We identify a critical threshold. What we refer to as magic number at 109.1% of GDP up to this point. That can still function as a development instrument beyond 109.1%, the relationship turns negative. Indicate the debt increasingly behaves a constraint that undermines the fiscal capacity needed to sustain SDG progress. Impact resources diversion. The mechanism is clear. In high-risk periods, government tend to prioritize security over long-term development. Budget resources chip away from education and social investment toward defense-related needs. In parallel, long horizon projects, especially green and sustainability infrastructure, are often postponed or reduced because it currently makes their politically and physically harder to sustain. Inflation in the inflation in the polycrisis. Inflation is widely now to hurt the poor and weaken welfare as decreased by sterling and fiscal. 21. However, our findings suggest the geopolitical risk plays a dominant role in shaping macroeconomic stress during the poly crisis. In practical terms, GPR amplifies volatility and can overshadow the standalone low role of inflation driving SDG outcomes. Development's memory. We observe a strong lag effect, indicate the SDG performance is persistent. Development has memory, progress accumulate over time creates resilience. But repeated shocks erode capability greatly. Gradually, this reinforces a central implication of our paper's short term. Turbulence does not always strong. It is outcomes immediately, but it can quietly weaken for capacity if the fiscal and institutional base is continuously strained. The fiscal virtues squeeze debt versus human rights. The human and policy costs become shivers under fiscal fatigue. As debt service consumes a growing share of public resources, government face shrinking space for health, education, and social protection. In this condition, policymakers become trapped, forced to manage obligation rather than invest strategically, making SDG delivery increasingly difficult number sustain is instability. Okay, here, strategic policy response. In conclusion, our study highlights the SDG progress in emerging economies is shaped by nonlinear fiscal dynamic and geopolitical instability. Under a polycrisis environment, we recommended three strategic response. Number one, keeping public debt below the identified 109.1% threshold. Number two, protecting priority SDG spending, particularly health and education, through social ring fencing. And number three, strengthening institutional quality as the most durable buffer against cascading shock. Ultimately, emerging economies must navigate these nonlinear forces for which realistic fiscal target and institutional reforms to safeguard progress toward the 2030 agenda. Summary and outlook. The 2030 agenda is under total threat from the nonlinear forces, financial fragility, and global tensions. Thank for your kind attention. I will be very happy to hear your insight, especially perspective and how emerging economics can better protect SDGs priorities. under fiscal and geopolitical stress. Uh, Thank you, everyone.